Hey, what's going on everyone? I'm the OPJellicent and I have my draft analysis for season number 7 of the Western Pokemon League. For those of you who don't know, I've actually commissioned this league since its third ever season, and I've actually had quite a bit of success in it. I've actually managed to win 2 seasons in a row in the past, but anyway, in this vid I'll go ahead and talk about the 11 Pokemon that I decided to draft for season 7 in the order that they were drafted, and just give you all some insight into why I decided to pick what I did. But before we hop right in, I'll actually leave a link to the WPL Twitter, as well as all the other coaches down below in the description if you do want to check that out. You can find the battle schedule for the season on the Twitter, and I'd highly recommend you check every other coach ad. But let's go ahead and just hop in right now. So I was actually randomized into the 8th drafting spot out of 16, which is definitely pretty bad. Could be worse. I guess 9 and 10 you could arguably say are worse, but definitely nothing special. But there was still quite a bit of good stuff around when it was my turn. Stuff like a Mew and Zygarde 50% were still around, and I believe Jirachi was as well, but I definitely wanted something that I had a lot of experience with for my first overall pick. And I also did want to get my hazards and hazard control started right away, so let's go ahead and reveal what I decided to draft. So for round number 1, I actually ended up picking Mega Deontay, which is obviously tier 1 now, since the whole Mega Evolution speed buff thing happened. But yeah, for anyone who may have not been around, I actually had Mega Deontay for season number 2 in the IBA, and it managed to take me all the way to the conference finals that season, which was really cool. It's a pretty reliable stealth rocker, since it does force out quite a bit of the draft pool, and you can just go ahead and throw those up as they switch out for sure. So that definitely had it going for it too. Really wanted the hazards on the board. It's also a pretty decent form of, well, I wouldn't really say hazard control, but like hazard deterrent due to its magic bounce ability, of course, and it's also a very solid fairy type. Good fairy types tend to be pretty scarce after the first few rounds, usually, from what I've seen, so I definitely thought that added some very good value to it, of course, and yeah, overall, really happy with this. It also starts me off at a really good speed tier 2, at I believe it's base 110, which is really good. Definitely is able to outpace any of the like base 100 to base 109 speed tier mons, so that's really nice, and I definitely just saw a lot of value with this pick right now, so really happy with it. And let's go ahead and move on to our second overall Pokemon. So heading into round number 2, I have no idea how this next pick was still around halfway through the second round, but I ended up grabbing Zygarde 50%, and the way I see it, Zygarde 50 is easily like a mid to late round 1 pick, and this thing in combination with Mega Deontay gets me started on a really good Fairy Dragon Steel core, which are definitely very big in the draft format. Usually, even if you aren't thinking about the core, you end up drafting one anyway from what I've seen. But anyway, back to Zygarde 50. Obviously, 1000 Arrows is one of the most spammable moves in the game. The only decent switch-ins are stuff like basically bulky ground types, I think, like Hippowdon and Landorus T from what I've seen, but even those don't really appreciate it. Hippowdon can definitely have reliable recovery, but yeah, they don't really appreciate banded attacks, and I actually did not make this one of my Z move users. We got to choose 3 of them, and the reason for that is I definitely saw some more value in some of my other Pokemon with access to Z moves, and I was looking at my matchups, and the only reason you would actually run like a Z Zygarde is for Z Outrage on like a Dragon Dance set, but none of the matchups that I actually looked at could really take advantage of that set, so I really did not want to run Z Zygarde this season. But if I do want to change it to Disease Zygarde, I can obviously do that with my transactions, which is definitely very cool. And I definitely am overall very happy with this pick. It's kind of insane that I managed to get Zygarde 50 and Mega Deontay, but let's go ahead and move on to round number 3. So for round 3 here, I actually decided to dive into tier 2 first before picking up my last tier 1, which isn't really something that I ever really do, just because a lot of the value tier 1s do usually go very quickly. But anyway, I ended up picking Reuniclus. Now, I really enjoy using bulky psychic types. Necrozma actually had like 15 or 16 kills when I used it this past ICBA season. But what Reuniclus has over that is access to Magic Guard, and obviously one of the biggest problems I had in the past drafting seasons is obviously drafting teams that are super weak to Stealth Rocks, and I definitely wanted to try to avoid that this time, and Magic Guard definitely helps in that regard. Reuniclus is just completely immune to hazards, T-Spikes too, and it doesn't really care about sticky webs at all, so definitely really valued that a lot. It also adds some value to my team in the fact that it actually starts a Regenerator core, which I really like too. You'll see that I actually kind of developed that Regenerator core in the next round right here. It's also not very predictable. There's quite a few sets that it gets. Gets access to Setup and Calm Mind and Iron Defense or Acid Armor. It also gets access to good utility and knockoff, T-Wave, that kind of thing. It can also run like the set with max special attack and Life Orb Magic Guard and like a max HP, so I really like that set. And then obviously Trick Room Sweeper is definitely a thing too, so really happy with this Pokemon right here, and let's go ahead and move on to the second half of our Regenerator core. And completing our Regenerator core right here, we have our 4th overall pick, which was Tornadus T, and I was really worried about this thing actually getting sniped in the 15 picks that were between Reuniclus and this one, but thankfully it actually ended up falling to me, and this thing offers so much value to my team. It gives me something that I didn't really have until at this point, which was reliable hazard control as a defogger, so I really liked that. The speed tier is also really nice right here. It's able to outspeed, basically put itself in that speed tier above Mega Deontay, and for stuff like Tapu Koko and Crobat, which would really want to run like Modest and Adamant Nature, to be able to, it forces them to run speed boosting natures, which is really cool. It also forms the start of a Volt Turn core, which I actually complete in the next round right away, as you'll see, but we'll go over that with my next pick. I also made this one of my 2 offensive Z-move users, just because it does get decent coverage, and Z Hurricane itself is just a super strong stab attack. But in terms of coverage, I think it gets Dark Pulse, Heat Wave, and I believe Psychic too, so those were definitely some cool options. But yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the second half of this Volt Turn core. So to complete our Volt Turn core right now, I actually ended up grabbing Raikou, which once again puts itself in that speed tier that's higher than Mega Deontay. It also forms a really fast Volt Turn core with my Tornadus T, which was honestly just too good to pass up as a tier 2 mon. I didn't end up making it a Z user just because its coverage isn't really anything special, I think. I think it's pretty much just Shadow Ball and Extra Sensory, but it still has potential to be unpredictable, as it's like a decent Scarfer. It can run that Subcom mindset, which a lot of inexperienced players definitely kind of fall to that quite a lot. And it's also just a Choice Specs wall breaker, which is really cool. It's also something that I definitely have experience with, which is something that I really value a lot. I use this thing in like every single draft that I participated in back in the regular Sun and Moon days. And I kind of like what I do with Kyurem Black now, so I definitely know what I'm doing when it comes to this mon. But yeah, the synergy right here with my Tornadus Therian, as well as Tech Priority and Extreme Speed, although I think you have to run an Adamant Nature for that, still definitely makes this a very cool option. And let's go ahead and move on to our round number 6. So entering the second half, I believe we're in the second half now, I ended up finally completing that Fairy Dragon Steel core I mentioned earlier and grabbed a Cobalion. Now, this thing is something I knew I wanted going into the draft, and I've always wanted to try it out, and the fact that I managed to grab it at round number 6 makes me quite happy. It adds to my Volt Turn core that I mentioned earlier, as it does actually get access to a Volt Switch. It's also a pretty fast mon, so it adds to the fast Volt Turn aspect. It does also give me another Stealth Rocker, which up to this point, I believe I only had Mega Deontay for Stealth Rock, so giving the Deontay to run an option to run more coverage is definitely something very great, and I can instead run rocks on this thing, so that's really nice. I also made it my second Z-move user alongside Torn right now, just because while its offensive stats aren't that great, I figured because of that, I figured the Z-move option could like turn those 2-hit KOs with the stab attacks into guaranteed kills, which definitely adds a lot more value to Cobalion right here, and yeah, nothing else else to really say about this. Once again, very solid speed tier at base 108. Let's go ahead and move on to round number 7. So for this next pick right here, I knew if I wanted Silvally, I would have to draft it right now, because all-type Silvally in tier 4 is just such a great value pick, and I knew if I didn't draft it right now, it would end up going in the 15 picks that were in between this pick and the next one, so I ended up grabbing it right here. I've never used it before. Obviously, it's super unpredictable, and pretty much the only way to get through it is to scout the typing and then go based on that. It also gave me more hazard control, of course, because now I have defog options on this alongside Torn, as well as Magic Bounce Deontay, so it helps out in that aspect. It does also get access to good momentum options in both Parting Shot, and I think it gets U-Turn as well. I don't believe it gets access to Volt Switch, but I'll double check on that. And other than that, really solid coverage. Of course, I would love to Z it, but unfortunately, I'm actually forced to run the memory discs, because in order to change its typing, you have to run that item. So kind of unfortunate, but still a very solid Pokemon, very good base stats at base 95 across the board. Just shy of those Pixie Pokemon at base 100, but definitely has very good potential right here. And I was honestly very surprised it was still on the board when it became my turn, of course, but let's go ahead and move on to my 8th pick. Now at this point in the draft, I could only draft one tier 3, and the rest of my picks had to be tier 4s and 5s after that, so I really had to make good use of this tier 3 pick right here, and I figured that I already had enough offense between Mega Deontay, Zygarde 50, Torn, and Raikou, and Cobalion, and I really did want a Rapid Spinner as well as a Water type. And the reason for that is I love to hazard stack, as you know. Webs and Specs are definitely one of my favorite ways to play hyper offense, and obviously if you're defogging, which was the only hazard control I had up to this so far, you're obviously getting rid of your own hazards on your opponent's side of the field too, so I really thought a rapid spinning option would be really great, and Tentacruel right here was my pick, and it does also get access to Toxic Spikes, which is really cool, and it does help out against super bulky rosters with that T-Spec right there, which there are a couple in the league which I do have to battle, which is kind of unfortunate, but I think we can handle that between all the taunt users, the Volt Turn, as well as T-Specs right here. Something that people actually overlook on this thing too is its speed tier. Like, I've run offensive Tentacruel with Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Giga Drain, and like Dazzling Gleam sort of thing before, and it does so much work, so maybe we can feature that at some point. with its nice base 100 speed, so that's really cool. And let's go ahead and hop into our final 3 Pokemon. So with the final 3 picks out here, I had actually noticed I had no Pokemon below Zygarde or Silvali's base speeds, besides my Reuniclus. And obviously Zygarde and Silvally have that base 95, and then there was a huge gap to Reuniclus all the way down at like base 30 or 20 or whatever it is, so I actually love budget fire types, as you guys know, and I've used Power a couple times in the past, so I decided to go ahead and grab Magmortar right here, which I wanted to try out, and it pretty much gives me that speed here which I wanted. It forces anything from base 81 to base 94 to run that speed boosting nature if they do want to outpace Magmortar right here, which is definitely cool. Obviously base 81s would be a speed tie, but yeah, pretty much helps out my speed tiers quite a lot. Unfortunately, anything below that base 81 range can still run that Adamant or Modest nature because they aren't afraid of being outsped, because they're going to definitely be outsped, so that's kind of why I had to do that. But Magmortar right here also appreciates all the Volt Turn support, as well as Hazard Control, which I've drafted up to now, as it is quite frail and it is also pretty weak to hazards between Stealth Rock, Spikes, T-Spikes, and Sticky Webs. It's affected by all of that, so definitely appreciates that, and I really think it synergizes with super well with what I've drafted up to now. And other than that, it's just a very strong fire type attacker. I believe its base special attack is like 135, maybe 125, so definitely a valuable tier 5 right here. And let's go ahead and get into the final 2. So I still have the ability to draft one tier 4 pick right here, and obviously between the importance of Stealth Rock and T-Spikes on this team, a spin blocker could really help out with that, so I decided to go ahead and grab Cofagrigus right here. Cofagrigus, whatever you call it. Cofag right here is actually something that I've run quite a bit. Definitely have experience with this thing, and I've used it 3 to 4 times before in draft, at once on the channel though, and it's also like another T-Specs user alongside Tentacruel, which is really cool, and it just gets so much utility between Knockoff, Will-O-Wisp, Memento, which is also why it's my Z-Captain, just for Z-Memento, because nothing else really took advantage of that Z-Captain ability, so Cofagrigus right here is definitely the best option, but it does also get Pain Split, and as I said before, access to T-Specs, which is really cool. It's also another really cool option on the Trick Room side of things, alongside Reuniclus, just because Trick Room Nasty Plot is super threatening, and after I get that +2 special attack, and get up Trick Room, nothing really wants to take +2 Shadow Balls or like a Ghost EMZ hit, besides like normal types, so that's really cool, and really happy with Cofagrigus right here. And let's go ahead and move on to our final Pokemon. And finally right here, my last mon is actually Gorbis. Now I must address, Gorbis isn't actually what I ended up drafting originally. I ended up being super ignorant and grabbing Girder, ignoring the fact that I had Cobalion kind of, so I had to use a free agent transaction to pick up Gorbis right here and drop Girder, so definitely kind of unfortunate. Thankfully it's still active for week 1 if I do want to bring it, but I do only have 2 free agent transactions left, which kind of sucks. But anyway, onto Gorbis right here. The main thing it does is really just do the Shell Smash sweep thing. Smash Pass is not allowed, unfortunately, so I can't Baton Pass Shell Smash boosts out. But I have managed to sweep this thing a couple times in the ICBA, so hopefully it can work out right here, and I'm really excited to have Gorbis again this season. But yeah, that's going to be our roster this season. Let me know what you guys think down below in the comments, of course. Let me know how you think we're going to do. It's a 12-week season, and week 1 will actually be going live this Sunday on August 5th, which is really cool. So I hope you all tune into that, and I'll see you next time. Later.